Please welcome me in joining our esteemed speaker, Dr. Fareed Senzai. Dr. Senzai is a professor of political science and international relations at Santa Clara University, renowned for his expertise in U.S. foreign policy and Middle East politics. Beyond academia, Dr. Senzai is a dedicated humanitarian, serving as the founder and president of Afghan Relief, an organization committed to aiding the most vulnerable in Afghanistan. With a Master of Arts from Columbia University and a PhD from Oxford University, Dr. Senzai has also contributed significantly to public policy and advocacy. He has played pivotal roles in think tanks like the Center for Global Policy and the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, conducting extensive research on Muslims in America. Today, Dr. Senzai will share his insights on the history of Islam and Muslims in America, along with the challenges faced by the Muslim community. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Fareed Senzai.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you to the Ummah student group that's made this invitation. I'm actually honored to be here. It's the first time for me to be on this campus. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about Islam, the Muslim community in the United States. It's a very diverse community. What I've been asked to do is to talk about the history of this community in the United States and provide, I guess, some context to how we know and understand this community. Hopefully from that, others will share their own personal experiences about Islam and Muslims in the United States. I've been researching this community for many, many years. It's a community that's a thriving community. It's a community that has grown over the years. It's a tremendously diverse community, but then also a community that's sometimes stigmatized and treated as a myopic, that it's a monolith, as if all Muslims are the same. But in fact, you see that this is a tremendously diverse community coming here from many, many countries. In fact, we did a study on Muslims in the Bay Area several years ago, in which we studied and assessed what the community looked like here in the Bay Area. And we found that Muslims came from 52 different countries just to the Bay Area. So it's a tremendously diverse community. And of course, with that, then, there are many other aspects of how it's diverse. Linguistically, religiosity, income levels, education levels. And so all of this makes it, in fact, probably the most diverse religious community in the United States. What I've been asked to do is to provide a broad, I guess, historic overview of the Muslim community in the United States. I've been given a very short time, so I'll try to cover that as quickly as I can. I've been involved with researching this community, as I said, for the past 20 years. The Pew Research Center is probably the gold standard on doing survey research. The Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, which is a research institute I had helped found 20 years ago, had worked closely with the Pew Research Center to do this research, conduct this research. There had always been this question about how many Muslims are in America. And there's a professor at Kentucky University, Dr. Hassan Bagby, that had always said there's about 6 to 8 million Muslims. But it wasn't a scientific study when one looks at the Muslim community. And so the Pew Research Center, along with our Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, did this joint study to assess what the number of Muslims were. We initially started the first study in 2007, and through that study, it indicated that Muslims, as you can see here from this graph, 2.35 million Muslims. Now, this was probably a slightly undercount for a number of various reasons. This was then followed up in 2011. We did a follow-up study, which we then showed there was 2.75 million in 2011. The last one that was done with Pew was in 2017. The population was 3.45 million. So now, you're looking at another 6-7 years later. Pew is planning to do another study again. I suspect you're looking at somewhere around 5 million Muslims in the United States. That's probably the most accurate scientific survey done, even though many Muslims will project, and advocacy groups will project that there's somewhere around 8 to 10 million Muslims in this country. So Pew, because it's reputable, it's well respected, that's the number that they have come up with. And that's the number that most academics tend to use as well. Now, Muslims, come, as I said, from many, many diverse backgrounds. But let me just tell you a little bit about the history of the United States in relationship to the United States. Did you know that the first country to recognize the United States was Morocco, a Muslim country, in 1777? And so when the United States first became a sovereign independent state, it was Morocco, a Muslim country, that recognized it soon after. In fact, just a few hours afterwards, was recognized by Morocco. First contact with Muslims, you may not realize this. Sometimes people assume that Muslims came only in the last 30 to 50 years, maybe, that these are immigrant Muslims that came here just recently. But in fact, the history of Islam goes way back, before the very founding of the state, before the United States even became a state. That there were Muslims that came here 200 plus years before the United States. In fact, one of the earliest Muslims is this individual here, Mustafa Zamur, as he's known, in 1527. He initially came as a slave, became an explorer, and his travels, which are shown in this map, starting in 1527 to 1539, documented to all these different places that he came in North America: Cuba, Mexico, Florida, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. Thousands of Moriscos, known as Muslims that had converted to Catholicism, also arrived early during this period. And so you can see that Islam actually has a long history in the United States. It's not something that's just recent. In fact, if you go to the Founding Fathers, that they in fact mentioned Islam. There are documents suggesting that Thomas Jefferson had a Quran in his library in which he referred to Muslims and Islam and spoke about them. John Adams, the same, spoke about Prophet Muhammad as a sober inquirer of truth, for instance. And so these individuals, as founding fathers in this country, had in fact known about Muslims, identified or said things about Muslims, in fact, even referencing Islam and Muslims in the very founding documents of this country. Some historians suggest that even the slaves that initially came that were brought to the United States, millions, of course, came to the Americas. 10 to 11 million slaves were brought here. Many, of course, were in Brazil and other parts of South America, but about 500,000 that came to North America. Many historians suggest that 25% of all slaves, some suggest as high as 40% of all slaves were Muslim. And of course, they came as Muslims or were Muslims before they arrived here, but they were forced to give up their faith, and subsequently then the roots of that faith of Islam in the very founding of this country through slaves is lost. But these individuals are just a few examples of some early slaves that came here or were brought here to the America. A very famous slave who later then wrote an autobiography and is well recognized, Omar ibn Said, as he's known, wrote an autobiography in which he documents his own faith. And here's a quote about his time in the United States. "Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of Muhammad, the apostle of God. May God have mercy upon him and give him peace. I walked to the mosque before daybreak, washed my face and head and hands and feet. I prayed at noon, prayed in the afternoon, prayed at sunset, prayed in the evening. I gave alms every year. I went on pilgrimage to Mecca, as all did who were able." Oops. Looks like I can't see the rest of it. But as you can see, documenting actual life for a Muslim as a slave here, and this was in 1831. The next wave of Muslims came closer towards the end of the century in 1878 to 1924. Many of these were Syrian and Lebanese Muslims from Greater Syria, and they settled along the eastern coast, including in places like Ohio, Michigan, which a large segment and large population of Arabs have settled in Detroit and in Dearborn, as we know. The Dakotas, for instance, many of them coming for economic reasons. So you see that the immigration of Muslims continued from the slave trade, continuing all the way into the turn of the century. European Muslims started to come initially from Bosnia as well as elsewhere, and many of those then started to settle in the central part of the country. And then Indian and subcontinent Muslims started to come and settle in the West Coast in the early 1900s. And you see, in fact, if you travel along the Central Valley, many Muslims that have been here for more than 100 years plus have settled and made their lives in the fruit industry. For instance, you see in Yuba City or places like Fresno. At that time, many of them were men from South Asia. They didn't, there weren't Muslim women here at the time, and so many of them ended up marrying Hispanic women. And you see sort of the blending of these cultures of South Asian foods with Mexican food, for instance, and Hispanic and Latino cultural mixing that takes place with this initial sort of emerging community all along Central California. The first mosque, for instance, was established in Ross, North Dakota in 1900. It was the first time that Muslims actually gathered for prayer. The first formal mosque was established in Ross, North Dakota in 1929, which is still standing today. As I said, many Muslims settled in Dearborn. They worked for the Ford Motor Company in Michigan and continue to thrive today. Muslims in politics. Over the years, we've seen that Muslims then have continued to immigrate. After the laws were changed in 1965, you started to see Muslims then immigrate from many, many other parts of the world. Today, the community, as I said, is a thriving, diverse community. Individuals that now have prospered in many different fields, including in politics. Some of the most prominent ones, for instance, Keith Ellison, former Congressman Keith Ellison, Rashida Tlaib, Andre Carson, and Ilhan Omar are currently prominent individuals and members of Congress. And so this community, as I said, has continued to thrive. It's a community that is doing remarkably well in many, many different fields. And so if you look at the demographics of Muslims, I'll give you just some basic demographics. I have a lot of slides and I won't bore you with all of them, but I'll give you just some basic data about this community. The majority of Muslims that have settled here are South Asian. And you can see from this Pew survey that was done, 20% of Muslims are from South Asia, 14% from the Middle East and North Africa, which constitutes mostly Arab Muslims, 13% from other parts of Asia, 5% from Sub-Saharan Africa, and 6% other, including many European countries. You can see that the majority identify themselves racially as white, 41%, 20% as black, and 28% as Asian, 8% as Hispanic, and 3% as other. And so this community, as I said, is a diverse community. It's a thriving community. It has economically prospered. But one thing should be noted, that even though you have a very thriving and prosperous community, you also have a community that is struggling as well. And so while the majority of Muslims do quite well, and many of the surveys and studies that we did found that Muslims economically do very well, in fact, their education levels are some of the highest, even higher than the national average, with such a large, significant portion of them going to college, for instance, or getting some college education, master's and graduate programs, including very high levels of PhDs from the Muslim community. But then also on the reverse side, so in many ways it's sort of this divide that's been created within the Muslim community, that on one hand, you have a very thriving, wealthy, well-to-do Muslim community, but then you also have a really struggling Muslim community. And interestingly, when you look at income levels with this community, nearly 40% of the community still makes less than $30,000 a year. And so you can see that even though there is such a large segment that does very well, making above $100,000 per year in household income, which is above the national average, you still have 40% that makes below that level. And then it's broken down. And if you look at the data in more detail, you find that African American Muslims, which constitutes a large segment of the population, and Afghan Muslims, believe it or not, I'm Afghan myself, and the Afghan Muslims in the South, the African American Muslim income levels tend to be some of the lowest. And so you have this divide that's there within the Muslim community. And as the community has grown over the years, it has then continued to face other problems as well, other social issues and other social problems, divorce rates, for instance, which were generally low before years ago. The divorce rate among Muslims is going up. Alcohol abuse, for instance, among the youth is going up. Even suicide rates, unfortunately, is rising within the Muslim community. And so you can see that in some ways it's reflecting more the broader American public. And so you see that many of these issues that the general public faces is also starting to impact the Muslim community as well. And so you can see that this is a community that is integrated. I mean, one of the studies that we did with Pew, the cover of that study was a community that is integrated and well-adjusted to American society. And so that's the very positive story about Muslims in this country, despite the fact that, as we said, it's a community that continues to struggle in many ways as well. And so the thing that we should sort of take away from this is that, in many ways, Muslims are a reflection of the general public across the United States. It's a community that is trying to struggle and deal with the same issues that many Americans are facing. It has many of the same social concerns that other Americans have, but also it's a community that's normal. It's a community that's normal, just like other Americans. And so one of the things that we often try to convey in these studies to say that, you know what, Muslims are no different than your neighbors and no different than the people that you go to school with. And so ultimately, Muslims want to be just like everybody else. Thank you so much.